How have the Baltimore Ravens' early 2024 free agency moves impacted their draft strategy? We talk about that and so much more come up next on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Ravens. We are your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, and I am your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, as always, and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and audio form wherever you get your shows. Be sure to subscribe and follow along. Video form and audio form. It's the same show, both audio and video, for Ravens news, analysis, updates, and so much more. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We are back here with another Mock Draft Monday. Of course, we do our Mock Draft Mondays before the draft. We're actually almost a month away now, which is so crazy to think about. It's kind of crept up really fast, the draft. We've been a couple weeks into free agency now. The Ravens have made some moves. And today I want to talk about the Ravens' early free agency moves and how they might be changing the team's draft strategy, whether it comes to just the overall positions they could take and what they're looking for there, but also if they could trade up or trade down based off of needs on the team right now. So we'll talk about additions, talk about losses, talk about the draft, and of course a lot more with that in the first part of the show. Then we're going to get into a Mock Draft Monday, and of course with that comes Mock Draft Mania. So I do a mock draft. If you're unfamiliar with the show, I do a mock draft every Sunday. I put that out on Twitter. And then on Monday, these episodes, I end up revealing who I pick and kind of going through my strategy. Then in the final part of the show, I do put out a tweet where you can respond to it on Sundays and put your mock drafts below. We're going to get to some Mock Draft Mania from Twitter to read out your mock drafts on the show. I'll try to get to as many as I can. Let's talk draft. Let's talk strategy, and let's talk early moves. I think for the Ravens, of course, the big one, there's no doubt about it, it's Derrick Henry in that addition there, 2 years, $16 million. Now, if there was any doubt the Ravens weren't going to spend a day one or day two pick on a running back, that should have evaporated the second the Ravens signed Derrick Henry. There was really no shot they were going to do it anyway. This running back class is just not deep. I honestly don't expect a running back taken, the first running back to be taken, until the third round. Baltimore was never taking a running back early. The earliest I can see the Ravens taking a running back is fourth round. Hint, hint for the mock draft I did on Sunday. But that's the earliest I can see them. The earliest, honestly, as free agency has gone on, the earliest I would personally find acceptable for the Ravens to take a running back, knowing that they invested a lot of money so far, at least for running back standards, right? The positions devalued in a Derrick Henry. Now, on the flip side of that, the Ravens have lost a bunch of players. Again, Henry's been their only big addition. I mean, they brought in Chris Board, have brought in some offensive line depth and corner depth, but Henry's been their guy. Now, this is going to change over the next month. Obviously, we're just talking about how their early moves have changed their draft strategy. We're going to probably figure out a bunch of other Ravens moves over this next month, and that will, again, morph their strategy. But it has to be the offensive line, right? I took another offensive lineman in the first round, one that somehow fell to me. I don't really know how it happened, but it happened. I took another offensive lineman because that just feels like the biggest need for the Ravens. As we've talked about extensively on this show, Baltimore's lost 3 starters, and that's no small feat to try to fill, right? They have guys on their roster who could be in the battle for those positions, like a Ben Cleveland, Daniel Falele, Saleh, Andrew Voorhees, Patrick McCary. Again, they signed Josh Jones. So there are players there. But I think for Baltimore, their strategy has to be taking an offensive lineman with at least one of their first 2 picks, if not just their first pick altogether. We had a conversation last week about if the Ravens were locked into taking an offensive lineman in the first round. I personally wouldn't go that far. I think Baltimore has enough other needs like wide receiver, edge. You could even talk about corner, where they're not locked into a guy. And we know the Ravens like to employ that best player available strategy a lot. But I mean, let's face it, this offensive line class, particularly the offensive tackle class, is extremely strong. One of the best tackle classes we've seen in a really, really long time. And to me, if you're Baltimore, I don't know why you wouldn't take advantage of that early, even if there is a really talented corner or a really talented edge. I'm not saying the Ravens can't get talent on day 2 or day 3 of this draft at the offensive tackle position. You can definitely do it. But depending on how this free agency period goes, I wouldn't want Josh Jones, right? A guy who has potentially 26 years old, but he's more of a swing tackle backup. I wouldn't want him starting, at least unless he provides that John Simpson-like performance in training camp. I would love to get a guy like a Troy Fautanu or Jordan Morgan, Tyler Guyton, Amarius Mims, one of those players. But who knows how many of those guys are going to be available. So this does come down to Baltimore's draft board, but we have not seen the Ravens add a starting quality corner. We've seen them lose a starting quality corner, Ronald Darby, right? On the edge, we haven't seen them add anybody. They still have Jadeveon Clowney and Kyle Van Noy out there in free agency, but they could be looking early for an edge guy if we don't see one of those two re-signed early on in this free agency period. And again, we're kind of moving out of the early part of it, right? We're about 2 weeks in. So now we're getting into the first and honestly second waves have settled. We're starting to really see how this free agency pool is shaping up. We can even talk about other positions of need like wide receiver. They have had Josh Reynolds in for a visit. They've had Michael Gallup in for a visit. We've talked about how that is, to me at least, putting some trust in Rashad Bateman in terms of not going out there and getting a guy who would challenge Bateman, but instead complement his role. But what if an Adonai Mitchell's available? What if a Brian Thomas is available? Or Xavier Worthy, one of those players, Keon Coleman? Do you take that guy if you're the Ravens? But to me, you've lost 3 starters on the offensive line. So to me, that's the biggest need, where there's still a possibility Clowney or Van Noy comes back. You did lose Darby, but that's only one corner. Wide receiver-wise, they haven't brought anybody in, but still have Zay Flowers, Nelson Aguilar. It's the offensive line. And I'm not saying they're going to draft 3 offensive linemen and all 3 of those guys are going to start day 1 of 2024. But if you can get a plug-and-play tackle at 30, or you trade back and get them, or even if you can find that in the early 60s in the second round, I think you have to do that. Whereas before free agency started, we knew the offensive line was going to be a need, but it wasn't to the point of, okay, well, Kevin Zeitler's definitely gone, and John Simpson's definitely gone, and they traded Morgan Moses. I think people expected maybe 2 of those 3 to happen, where Simpson, I don't think a lot of people expected back. Moses was a cut candidate, but a lot of people had said, all right, well, there's a chance Kevin Zeitler comes back. Now, honestly, the writing was probably on the wall there when the Ravens didn't extend him when they had the chance to not have his dead money. But at the end of the day, kind of have to look at this as not complete because still have Linderbaum and Stanley, but a pretty significant revamp of the offensive line. And so now the question becomes, well, if they really like a wide receiver who's there, or they really like a corner who's there, does that outweigh having a really good offensive lineman on the board there? And if you have those 3 ranked, wide receiver 1, corner 2, offensive lineman 3, and you're there at 30 and all 3 of those guys are available, it would feel bad to pass on a wide receiver you really like or a corner you really like for a guy who's lower on your draft board. But Baltimore's going to have to weigh this draft cycle of, is there enough confidence that the guy's going to drop to the second round? Are they confident enough in a guy like a Patrick Paul, or could they trade up in the second for an offensive lineman? They do have a pretty big bevy of picks this year. So it is possible, but the strategy the Ravens are going to have to use, again, we're talking about a month out, right? So as I said earlier in the show, we're still a month out from knowing if the Ravens have added a corner by the time the draft starts, have brought in a veteran quality offensive lineman. You know, Josh Jones is fine, but are they going to bring in somebody else? Is Jadeveon Clowney or Kyle Van Noy back? Now, they did sign Arthur Millette back, so that does give some insight into, okay, well, they're not going to need to draft a nickel corner because they have Millette, or Darius Washington also was brought back, and Pepe Williams can also be that guy for you. At least he has a shot to compete for that job. So I think Baltimore's going to be looking for on-the-boundary corners, looking for athletic offensive linemen, and, of course, guys who can slot in and play immediately. But, look, I wouldn't be shocked if Baltimore gets their plug-and-play tackle. They have Ben Cleveland start at one of the 2 positions. And then there's maybe a competition for the others between Voorhees, Saleh, Josh Jones, etc. Wouldn't shock me, but Baltimore, in my opinion, with the amount of players they've lost in a deep offensive line class, should probably take 2, if not 3 offensive linemen in this draft. And that's not saying that, oh, you got to give up on a Falele, you got to give up on a Cleveland. That doesn't have to happen with that. It's extremely valuable to have quality offensive line depth, especially as we have seen the offensive line market in free agency has all of a sudden become, well, Robert Hunt's getting 5 for 100, Damian Lewis getting 4 for 53, John Simpson got $9 million per season, Tyron Smith got a 1-year deal worth up to $20 million in incentives. So again, those aren't bad players, but the offensive line market is always going to be inflated because that is such a premium position across the league. So if you can get quality players on cheap rookie contracts with 4 or 5 years of team control, and this is a good offensive line class, and Baltimore has a lot of picks, it makes sense that the strategy might shift from, all right, best player available to maybe we got to prioritize a little offensive line. Maybe that's what the Ravens are thinking right now. So we'll see what happens. I don't think it's going to shift too dramatically. I wouldn't be shocked if Baltimore took a wide receiver, a corner, or an edge player in the first round. Any position other than that, like a defensive lineman, a tight end, a center, for example, that would shock me. Quarterback obviously is not going to happen. But one of those positions, even like a safety, would shock me. But again, those 4 being offensive line, corner, edge, and a guy, I think with those 4, with wide receiver, edge, corner, and offensive line, you can rank them, but there are enough quality players at each position where you can still do best player available. But my thing is, well, how long are you going to do best player available if the best player on your board isn't an offensive lineman for 3 consecutive rounds? You're going to scrap that all together. And I'm not saying Baltimore's been a best player available team in terms of that's the only type of strategy they employ. They don't. Obviously, they pick for need and they pick best player available. They don't handicap themselves to one strategy, but we know Baltimore loves that best player available. So we'll see, but I do think the early moves have changed the draft strategy, but we're only 2 weeks into free agency. Plenty more could happen down the line, especially because the draft is still a little bit over a month away. Coming up in the second part of the show, we'll get into the mock draft I did for Mock Draft Monday. A very quality offensive tackle falls, running backs, so a lot of stuff to dive into next year on Locked On Ravens. First of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one-seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Now, I have UConn winning it all, so I'm still in it. Houston went on a little bit of a nail-biter. I have them in my final, so it's Houston-UConn with UConn winning. I still have my final 4 in, so we'll see how it all plays out for me, but my bracket is very, very busted at the moment. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. We are back, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Allstriker still talking with you here on this mock draft Monday. Really appreciate everybody being here with me, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. And shout out to the everydayers who listen to the show every single day. I really appreciate everybody who tunes into the show. Whether it's your first time in, also welcome into the channel. If you're somewhere in the middle, welcome back to the show. Plenty of Ravens content to dive into. We do 5 days a week, even in the offseason, even the dull periods when there's nothing really going on. We do 5 days a week regardless. So if you want your one-stop shop for Ravens, we have you covered right here. Let's get into my mock draft that I did. I'm going to pull it up quickly, and then we're going to talk about it. This one, I was very pleased with the way that it fell to me, and I actually did a very similar strategy to last week, and it's not exactly the same. I do try to switch it up where even if there are players I really, really like, just for the sake of the show, I try to switch it up so we can talk about different prospects. Now, there are some that are similar, some that I picked the same, but again, even if there are guys, I don't want to just have the same mock draft to talk about 5 times in the 7 mock draft Mondays we do. So I do want to switch it up. Now, number 30, I don't know how in the world this happened, but if you've been with me every day, you know my saying is if the mock draft simulator gives it to you, you take it. So I took it, and that's Talise Fuanga out of Oregon State, who fell to me at 30. He's falling in this mock draft simulator. I don't know how it's happening, but it happened this time. He's probably going to go top 15 at the very max. I could see him going top 10. He is that good. He has incredible athleticism, strength, power. He plays the position with a tenacity, someone that I think has all pro potential. And look, this is a dream. I don't know. There's no way this actually happens, but you know what? It's nice to kind of talk about, give us some perspective on how deep this tackle class is, because there are arguably 7 or 8 first-round talents at the offensive tackle position. Now, Fuaga is one of the best ones, and I don't think he's going to be there at 30, but he also gives a very interesting profile, in my opinion, because what I actually value, I don't know how much I value it, but I do in this particular circumstance, is the ability for whoever the Ravens draft to kick into guard, or the ability at least, just to have that in their repertoire to kick into guard. Baltimore doesn't need that. They don't need a guy who can kick inside, but the obvious versatility, it's good. It's good to have. So for the Ravens in this pick with Fuaga, you'd want him to slot in as your right tackle, played primarily right tackle at Oregon State. That would be where you want him in there. But if it's an Amarius Mims, if it's a Troy Fautanu, right, Tyler Guyton, one of these players, Jordan Morgan, these guys some of them have that inside-outside versatility, some of them don't. But how I envision this going, it's cool to have, but you don't need it. I just think it's a part of Fuaga's game that makes him even more intriguing, to where if the Ravens really needed him to kick inside to right guard or even play on the left side after Ronnie Stanley, and whenever his contract is up, it's going to be up after next season. But whenever the Ravens decide to move on, is he going to move over there? But he can be a plug-and-play right tackle, and he has all-pro potential. So this is a no-brainer if it happens, but I'm just warning everybody now, it's not going to happen. Then at 62, I took Xavier Legette, wide receiver from South Carolina. I've taken him at this spot in my last couple of mock drafts. It's just too good to pass up. I expect him to go. I could see him going at the very, very end of the first round. I would more so see him going very early in the second. He's probably going to go maybe like Michael Pittman Jr. range. He's rising up draft boards. He has the physical tools and traits that Baltimore's looking for. They don't need a smaller, shiftier route runner, excelling wide receiver. They need a bigger body who can go up, catch contested passes. They need that skill set on their roster right now more so than the route runner-y type. Not that Legette can't run routes, but you know what I'm saying with that. This is a guy that fits Baltimore. At 62 would be an absolute steal, but I just don't think he's going to be there. But again, Mock Draft Simulator gave it to me, so I'm absolutely taking it. Then Renardo Green, corner from Florida State, was my pick at 93. Corner is a need for the Ravens. Brandon Stevens is a free agent after the year. Marlon Humphrey, his contract is a little bit up for debate in terms of what the Ravens do over the next couple of seasons. Green is somebody that does have some really good potential, very physical, is able to be around the ball a lot. Now, the one thing with Green, he might be too physical at times. And we've seen that profile, right? Marlon Humphrey can get very grabby and get some holding calls and some pass interference called against him. Green, I think, even takes that to another level with how physical and how aggressive he can be with his hands and just getting hands on guys. I think that's something that can be cleaned up, though. I don't think it's a trait where you have to deal with that for an entire career. With the right coaching, I think you can mold Green. If you take that out of his game, everything else looks really, really good. People are just concerned about the over-aggressiveness, but that doesn't concern me as much because I think Baltimore does have a really good program in place, and I'm confident in Baltimore's coaching. They can correct some of that. Now, as promised, I did take Blake Corum from Michigan at number 113. Some people love this pick. Some people hate this pick. I don't think there's any in between. People either love it or hate it, but I am in between. Like, it's a pick where Corum can come in. I get the tread on the tires. I get the injury a couple of years ago, but he's a really talented back. Baltimore could use him in a lot of different ways, and we have to admit Derrick Henry's not a long-term solution at running back, right? Not that Corum is this, player that's coming in at 20 years old. Obviously, he's a bit older than that, but I still think that if you get really solid production out of Corum, you have Keaton Mitchell, you have Justice Hill. I get it. Running back's not a need, but there was not really anybody else at this position that was really doing it for me. I mean, there was no one else that really excited me. So I just took Corum. I didn't want to reach for a need and go down to a player I thought wasn't as good at the spot. At this point, I just took best player available because he should have been gone a while ago. I think he gets taken probably in the third round. But again, from Baltimore, I'm not taking the guy till the fourth, so I thought it was solid value. McKinley Jackson, defensive lineman from Texas A&M. I took it number 130. If that sounds familiar, defensive lineman from Texas A&M, Mr. Justin Madubuike himself, a Texas A&M defensive lineman the Ravens took in that 2020 draft class. So that's any indication. It works out the way the last Texas A&M defensive lineman did. Say it works out pretty well. Now, McKinley Jackson, I think, is one of the highest upsides in this class, especially at this position. Him falling to 130 was ridiculous. I expect him to go in the third round. I don't know why he was available about 50 picks later than I expected him to be. But again, Mock Draft Simulator gives it to you. This is about best player available for these next two picks here in Corum and Jackson. But sometimes it just goes that way. Sometimes that's what you need to do, where you build up that depth. Broderick Washington's going to be in the second year of his 3-year extension, so we're going to see how that works out for him, or at least, the second year since he signed the extension, I'll say. But Michael Pierce, not a long-term option on a defensive line. I would probably assume he retires after next season. Brent Urban, not a long-term solution either. So I don't think defensive line is too bad of a pick if it doesn't come on day 1 or day 2. I think you can spend a day 3 pick on it and feel okay about it. And the Ravens also love taking defensive linemen. I think they have had 1 year where they haven't taken a defensive lineman. And it was a couple years ago. I can't remember exactly, but I'm taking an offensive lineman here. And I think it's a good pick because Jackson is incredible in terms of the upside, can be a disruptor. He already is a disruptor in the run game and also has the ability as a pass rusher to grow into that part of his game. Then I have Kitana Ladapo, the safety from Oregon State at 165. The Ravens do need a third safety after letting Geno Stone go and Geno Stone going to the Bengals. I think Oladapo could be a solid option. He's an experienced player, is around the football, does a good job. So I just think a very solid pick at 165, and it is a need for them. Now, Eric Watts at 218. I kind of did this mock draft assuming one of Jadeveon Clowney or Calvin Noy would be back, which kind of goes against what I do with these mock drafts, but I did it for this one. Watts is someone who has a lot of potential, but definitely needs a couple of years to develop. But the Ravens do need quality players now on that line, especially at the S position. And so that's why I'm saying, well, you're talking about a defensive line, or I guess an edge group, doesn't have a lot of proven talent. Watts is not a proven talent. But again, I assume Clowney or Van Noy would be back. So that's what I did here. Jaquan Shepard, corner from Maryland at 228. Got to get some Maryland love going. I like picking 2 corners in this class. I think there are a lot of solid options on day 2 and day 3 at corner. Shepard is someone that, again, does need some seasoning, needs some time to kind of hone his skill set. But you draft Green, you have other players here. I think the Ravens do have a veteran, so I think it's a pick you can live with. And then Jacob Monk from Duke at 250. I like Monk's game a lot. Super physical, has a mean streak, and pretty good both in the run and the pass game. Does need to refine a little bit of stuff. But look, last pick of the draft, I think he should go higher than he's being taken in these simulators. But again, I'm taking what the mock draft simulator gives me there. So I thought a really solid draft for me. I love the Fuaga, Leggett, Green, 1, 2, 3 there. Corum and Jackson, luxury picks, and the rest just filling out the depth for me there. Coming up, we'll be talking a bit about your mock drafts and sort of getting into some mock draft mania and some more housekeeping notes around the Ravens. Stay tuned. A lot to get to here on Locked On Ravens. We're back, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher still talking with you here on this Monday. Again, really appreciate all the support that I've gotten here on this show and that everybody has given me as we've kind of continued on this journey here on Locked On Ravens. We're coming up decently soon on 5 years hosting this show. I've not missed one single episode. Today will be episode 1,211 consecutively. So been doing this since August of 2019. Hopefully, the Ravens will be able to get the job done, win a Super Bowl this time around. But regardless, we continue to daily content, 5 days per week, plus bonus content. We do live shows, bonus episodes. So be sure to subscribe and follow along for your daily Ravens content. Whether you're an everyday or first time in or you're somewhere in the middle there, thank you for all the support. Let's get to your mock drafts, though. Again, for those who are new to the channel, for those who don't know how mock draft Mondays work around here, we do my mock draft, and then I put in a quote tweet of the mock draft that says, if you have a mock draft, put it below, and I'll get to as many as I can on the Monday show. So again, I see all of them. I really appreciate everybody who submits these. You know, when this was a smaller show, just starting out, I've been doing this for years. Obviously, I didn't have as big of a following as I do now. So, you know, I get to a lot of them, but we get so many comments and so many mock drafts that I just can't get to all of them in a show. So I appreciate everybody, and I do read them all. I do look at them all. But I just go based off who are the ones that pop up first for me, and that's how we go. So let's first get into a mock draft from Johnny. Good name, by the way. I like that. Johnny, who has the Ravens taking Adlai Mitchell, wide receiver from Texas at pick 30. Patrick Paul, tackle from Houston at 62. Cam Hart, corner from Notre Dame at number 93. Trey Benson, Florida State running back at 113. Zach Zinter, Michigan guard at 130. Trevor Keegan, Michigan guard at 165. Khalid Duke, Kansas State edge at 218. Willie Roberts, Louisiana Tech, corner at 228. And Andrew Rame, Oklahoma center at 250. I don't know why PFF gave Patrick Paul D- grade. I guess they're okay. They have him at 86 on the big board. I have him more so around where Johnny took him here at 62. But I like that first 3, Mitchell, Paul, and Hart. I think there's a really solid sweet spot for corners in like the late second to mid to late third. That includes guys like Kyrie Jackson and the guys that we've talked about here in the show, Renardo Green, and obviously Cam Hart's one of those guys as well. Max Mitchell from Rutgers, and I think, Newton from TC. There are a lot of guys. Cam Hart falls in that category. Benson's a really interesting prospect. And again, 113 is where I said that fourth round is where I say, all right, I'm okay with a running back. Benson, I think, is really intriguing to me. And a Benson, Henry, Hill, and Mitchell backfield, that sounds pretty nice. And then so this is a 4 offensive lineman draft. I'd probably only take 3. If I had to change one thing about this, maybe instead of where Khalid Duke is at 218 with the edge, I'd maybe take an edge instead of one of the Michigan guards. Look, it'd be funny, John Harbaugh coming in, or Jim Harbaugh coming in to John's league here. I'm calling it John's league, the NFL, although Jim played for a couple of years, including with the Ravens. But Jim coming in after John's been a head coach for a while after Jim left, and taking both of his Michigan guards. So that'd be pretty funny. But I'd like to double cornerback dip with Willie Roberts, as well. I'd say solid. Mitchell is somebody that I don't think is going to be there at 30. Again, I think he has improved his stock enough. If he is there, you really got to consider taking him, though. That's somebody that I really, really like. Let's get into one from Jay here. The Ravens taking Jordan Morgan at 30 from Arizona, the offensive tackle. Xavier Legette, wide receiver from South Carolina at 62. Javon Solomon, edge from Troy at 93. Zach Zinter, offensive guard from Michigan at 114. Malik Mustafa, safety from Wake Forest at 130. Cedric Johnson, edge from Ole Miss at 165. Jarrett Kingston, offensive guard from USC at 212. Frank Crum, offensive tackle from Wyoming at 218. Solomon Byrd, edge from USC at 228. And Gabriel Murphy, edge from UCLA at 250. I see there was a trade in here. I think moving back, it might have been 113 to 114, honestly. Might have been only back one pick. But Jordan Morgan, really solid. I have him as a late first or early second, so I'd be fine with the Ravens taking him at 30. Legette, we've talked about him, really like that pick. Solomon, someone who's seen his stock rise a lot. Insane production at Troy, but the question with him, as is most smaller school prospects, is can you contribute and move that production from a smaller school, this non-Power 5, into the NFL? Solomon has a lot of key traits, and obviously the production stands out, but that's going to be the question with him. So I've seen him taken more in like the 4th or 5th round. 93 to me, I'd probably hold him in the 4th round, but 93 is still okay. It's not the biggest reach in the world. So I'd say a solid mock draft from Jay here. Now, again, this is a 4 offensive lineman mock, so I, again, might say for this one at least, maybe a corner. I see no corners on this draft, so maybe instead of Zinter at 114, you kind of get in that corner sweet spot, or you're just coming out of it, so I'd maybe take a corner there for me. But again, it's nothing to necessarily split hairs over. I think it's still a solid mock draft here from Jay. All right, let's see. Next one, we'll get into one from Tusay. First, Tyler Guyton, offensive tackle from Oklahoma at 30. Jalen Polk, wide receiver from Washington at 62. Mason McCormick, offensive guard from South Dakota State at 93. Jaden Hicks, safety from Washington State at 113. Alex Hunt, edge from Houston Christian at 130. Isaac Guerrero, running back from Louisville at 165. Logan Lee, defensive lineman from Iowa at 218. Sam Hartman, Notre Dame quarterback at 228. And Jaquan Shepard, corner from Maryland at 250. Guyton is another guy. Have him as a late first, early second guy. Be totally fine with the Ravens taking him at 30. Polk is someone I really do like. I think there's a lot of players in that 62 range where if the Ravens don't take a receiver at 30, there are going to be maybe some quality guys available at 62, depending on who falls, like a Polk or a Burton. Maybe Legette's there. I really don't think he is. I think he goes early 30s, but the second round receiver class, all the first, talk about Marvin Harrison and, guys like Malik Neighbors and Romeo and all those guys. But that late first to late second, there are going to be a lot of quality receivers taken. Polk, I think, is going to be in that conversation as well. Then the offensive line again with McCormick. I like this one a lot. I think the Ravens also, some people are kind of dissing on the quarterback picks late. I think the Ravens could. I see it's Hartman here, but a guy like a Joe Milton out of Tennessee, the Ravens could take a developmental, maybe backup quarterback to Lamar. Tyler Huntley gone to Cleveland. Josh Johnson, not a long-term option. And we don't really know about Malik Cunningham right now. So I would not be shocked if Baltimore took a quarterback in the later rounds here. Just take a flyer on somebody. All right, let's get now into one from 30th pick, Brian Thomas Jr. All right, so I think I know where Steven's guys see a Stephen Mayer 18, but I see where Steven wants a pick here. He has a trade up and a trade down one. Well, his name is Brian Thomas, so we'll do the Brian Thomas one as a trade up. So he says the trade up 30-93 in a 2025 second and third for 21 and a 2025 fourth and fifth. And then in this one, he also trades back from 165 Miami 2025 fifth for 179 and 192. All right, so Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver from LSU, is at 21. Then Austin Booker, edge from Kansas, at 76. Mason McCormick from South Dakota State, offensive lineman at 113. Elijah Jones, corner from Boston College at 121. Christian Jones, offensive lineman from Texas at 130. Tyron Tracy Jr., running back from Purdue at 179. Logan Lee, defensive lineman from Iowa at 192. Dominique Hampton, a safety from Washington at 218. Jordan McGee, linebacker from Temple at 228, plus that Miami 2025 fourth. And he said that's the trade down one. So we're going to talk about only the trade up one this time. I think Brian Thomas Jr., he's risen a little bit here, where obviously everybody's talking about neighbors from LSU, but Thomas Jr. has that profile where now I think he's going to go more so in like the 15 to 25 range, as opposed to where some people had him earlier in the draft process, which was like, I don't know, 30-ish to 40-ish. He's improved his stock. I think if he's available at 30, you almost have to take him in most circumstances, unless somebody else crazy like Fuanga falls. Booker at 76, you get the edge there. I might take, instead of, I guess in the offensive line. So I like the first four because it addresses all four needs with wide receiver, edge, offensive line, and corner. Plus the next pick is Christian Jones that double dips with the offensive line need for Baltimore. So I actually do like that. Now, maybe I would see who's available. I don't know who's available in this, but it's 76. If there was a bet, like if Patrick Paul falls to 76, I would take him here, then maybe move for another edge, like a guy like Javon Solomon, who I think could be really, really solid for him. So in my opinion, this is a solid mock draft, getting a guy like Brian Thomas. But of course, the question with this is, does Baltimore, are they able to invest even more draft capital in a wide receiver after Eric DeCosta has invested in 3 first-round wide receivers over his tenure? I don't think that should deter the Ravens from taking a talented player, but they already have invested a lot of capital, so I think that's where some people are a little concerned about that, but it doesn't necessarily worry me as much as others. So, again, really solid mock draft here by Steven. That's all I have for you today, though, on Locked on Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up tomorrow, more NFL content, more Ravens content, of course. So be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked on Ravens.